people parking after a car ride have a potential to relieve themselves upon arrival. What is happening to our unique village atmosphere? Opening up the doors to commercial uses on residential property is going to create some real animosity between neighbors. Is that a threat? I am going to tell you a dramatic story about local government politics, small town drama, and parking lots. This story takes place in the town of Springdale, Utah. It's located right at the mouth of Zion's National Park, a world-famous park with views like you have never seen. Now, this town of Springdale is pretty small. There's actually only 500 people who live there, because the town is right in the middle of a canyon. So on either side, you have these giant cliffs. And also, because the town is located in a canyon, there's no room to develop. And so real estate values in the town are pretty high. In fact, right now the average home value in Springdale, Utah is over $2 million. Because Zion's National Park is so popular, lots of tourists want to get there, but they have to go through the town. And so in recent years, there have been major problems with parking, with tourists parking all over the place, treating the town like they own it, when the local residents just want some peace and quiet. Now, this all came to a head in 2017 when some locals wanted to build parking lots, because they figured, hey, tourists are already parking up and down our street anyway, why don't we build a parking lot and make some money? This story was actually such a big deal at its time that it went to court multiple times, and I'm going to share some facts that didn't make it to court. Now, before we get to the juicy allegations, I need to give you a little bit of backstory. So Springdale, like most other cities in the US, has a zoning code. And the zoning code divides up the land in the town into different districts, and each district has its own rules. So there's a residential area, and there's a commercial area, and there's an industrial area, and so forth. Now, in Springdale, they did something interesting, because parking lots are typically found in commercial zones or industrial zones. Now, you might see a parking lot in a residential zone, but that's typically because it'll be attached to a use that's already permitted, like a church or a school. And it's uncommon to find just giant commercial parking lots right next to a suburb. Now, Springdale did something different. They actually permitted commercial parking lots in residential zones as long as the applicant obtains a conditional use permit. Getting a conditional use permit is essentially a process whereby the landowner has an idea to use the property in a certain way, takes that idea to the city, and then the city studies the proposed use and the location and the surrounding properties and identifies any negative effect that the use would have on the surrounding properties, and then imposes conditions on the use that will hopefully reduce the negative effect on the neighborhood. So for example, with a parking lot, the city might say, sure, you can build a parking lot, but you also have to build an 8-foot fence around the parking lot, and it has to be able to block the light and the noise from the cars inside the parking lot. And maybe you need to limit the number of stalls so you don't have too many emissions, and so forth. Now in Utah, where Springdale is located, there's a statewide rule that says conditional uses are okay, but the city can't deny a permit unless it has substantial evidence that there is no way to reduce the harmful effects on the surrounding neighborhood, which means that if there is any reasonable condition that would reduce the negative effect on the neighbors that the city can impose, then the city must approve the application. This case revolves around a guy named Alan Stalker, who owned 3 acres of land in the town, and he's the one who wanted to build a parking lot. So the way his property was situated is that the front part, which was touching the main road, had a little old house on it, and then there was a driveway that looped around the house, and then a big open area in the back, and then behind that there was a bigger house where I assume that Alan Stalker lived. And what he wanted to do was demolish the little house in the front, and then build a big parking lot, and then he wanted to enclose the parking lot with a fence that would screen it from the neighbors. Now the parking lot was actually, in my opinion, located in a great place for a parking lot, because across the street there was a mom and pop shop that sold geodes of all things, and I think they also sold some dinosaur bone replicas and other touristy things. And then, only 500 feet from the proposed parking lot was a shuttle station where the Park Service would pick up tourists and shuttle them into the park. So Alan Stalker says this is the perfect place for a parking lot, and he applies for a permit, and the neighbors are outraged. But we'll get to that in a minute. So the city reviews his permit, it goes through the planning commission, it goes through the city council, they listen to the public and to their staff, and at the end of the day, they deny the permit. They say that there are no reasonable conditions that could ever be imposed to reduce the harmful effect of the noise and the traffic on these houses. Now, Alan Stalker is not a quitter, so he went ahead and he sued the city, and he said, you should have approved my permit. Now, this case was litigated for many years, but at the end of the day, it all boiled down to the question of whether the city had enough evidence that there was no reasonable condition that could have made the parking lot work. Was it true that no matter what, this parking lot would always impose an unreasonable detriment on the neighboring properties? Now, I think this case is interesting because the city only provided 3 pieces of evidence. The first one is an internal memo from a member of the city staff, and it went to the Planning Commission and then to the City Council. And this memo was pretty thorough, and it basically went through the local zoning ordinance and compared it to the application and then gave an opinion saying that it should probably be denied. Evidence number 2 were the minutes from the Planning Commission meeting and the Town Council meeting, where both bodies thoroughly discussed the issue, evaluated the application, had some rousing debate, listened to the public, and then ultimately voted to deny the application. And then the third piece of evidence is the actual application that Alan Stalker submitted himself, which has a map of the area and shows the lot where Alan Stalker wants to build the parking lot, and it also shows that there are a few neighboring houses nearby. Now, if you ask me, that's not a lot of evidence. It's probably not substantial evidence that there's no way to make this parking lot work, but in this case, it was enough for the judge. The judge did say, however, in the opinion, that the evidence was less than ideal with respect to details. But at the end of the day, the city won, Alan Stalker never built his parking lot, and that's the end of the story. Or is it? Welcome to the Allegedly Zone. I've got over 80 pages of screenshots, receipts, emails, maps, and reports, evidence that was not brought up in court, but maybe should have been, and I'm gonna go through the best of it. Let's do this. January 17, 2017. This is around the same time that Stalker submitted his application for a permit to build a parking lot. The town council held a closed meeting, which means it's not open to the public, to discuss anticipated litigation. February 8, 2017, the Planning Commission reviews a permit application for another parking lot in the city for 51 cars. It's going to be behind a restaurant, but there are houses all around it, and the Planning Commission unanimously recommends approval. February 8, 2017, same day, by the way, the City Council holds a public hearing and considers both the parking lot behind the restaurant that I just mentioned and another parking lot application by this guy named Richard Manson. This is further out in the town. Finally, on February 8, the City Council hired a parking consultant for almost $50,000 to do a parking management study. March 8, 2017, the Town Council finally considers the 2 other parking lot applications that are tabled the month before and a new application from Alan Stalker. This is the Stalker parking lot that the case was all about. Now, the City Council received a recommendation from the Planning Commission, as it was supposed to, on the Alan Stalker parking lot. The Planning Commission recommended to deny the Stalker conditional use permit, but 2 of the 5 planning commissioners actually voted to recommend approval. And interestingly, one of those commissioners who voted to approve said on the record that there wasn't enough evidence to deny the conditional use permit. So at this point, the town council holds a public hearing about the Alan Stalker parking lot, and it solicits feedback from the public about whether they should approve or deny. Stalker gets up there, and one of the questions that they ask him is, what do your neighbors think of you building a parking lot on your property? And he says, and I quote, "Mr. Stalker assumed neighbors were likely not much in favor, but he received comment it was his property and he could do what he wanted." Classic rookie mistake, because in land use law, it might be your property, but you probably can't do what you want with it. Now, at this point, the town ran out of time in their meeting and they decided that they couldn't postpone the application, so they had to just make a decision. They wanted to because they had already hired this parking consultant for 50 grand, and they kind of wanted to wait and see what that study was gonna say, so they could have more evidence. I wonder if they were worried they didn't have enough evidence. So they actually asked Alan Stalker, hey, we know we can't under our code, but do you want to just voluntarily postpone your application? And he said he would wait until the traffic study was completed because his attorney said that he wouldn't lose any of his privileges under the current zoning code. That ended up not happening though. Ultimately, the city council denies the Stalker proposal unanimously. They also approve the restaurant parking lot on a vote of 4 to 5, so only one of the city council members dissented. And then finally, the city council also denied the Richard Manson parking lot on the outskirts of the city. After Alan Stalker filed his application and the city council denies all of these permits, the city council actually amended the zoning ordinance to prevent all parking lots in that area of the town. And I don't know, maybe they just hate parking lots, but it did put Alan Stalker in a difficult situation because at this point, he can't go back and submit a new application because the law now says that you can't have a parking lot. So he's stuck with his initial application, which he submitted under the prior ordinances, and all he can do is appeal and hope that the courts will overturn the city council's decision. Skipping ahead a couple months, while litigation is brewing, a news article comes out that says that the town had received a $1 million grant from the government to build new parking lots. At this point, the town council was already in talks actually with a private developer to build a $2.5 million public parking lot that was located only 1.3 miles away from the Stalker parking lot. And this was actually approved despite the fact that there were geological hazards in the area, and multiple town residents actually protested and they said you can't do this because there's a mountain that's slowly moving toward the road, and if you put a parking lot right there, there's going to be a landslide at some point. This is a direct quote from the news article. Interestingly, the city is high on building the parking lot, but recently turned down 2 of the 3 recent applications for conditional use permits by Springdale landowners to construct private parking lots. In the same news article, Richard Manson gave some comments. He said that he doesn't understand why the council doesn't approve his lot, since he feels his property is ideal, having no adjoining private residences, and in fact his closest neighbor is over 1,000 feet away. Madsen says, quote, "I thought it was a slam dunk," end quote. He said the reasons he was denied were absolutely ridiculous. He says, quote, "The double standard is incredible up here. It's been frustrating. They have their own agenda. They want to line their pockets." Now, does the town actually want to line its own pockets? I don't know. In August, just a few months later, they started a paid parking program, so essentially putting meters on public streets. Then in October, there was a mayor election, and according to a news article, parking and infrastructure are all first and foremost on the candidates' minds as the town moves into a more crowded future. The incumbent mayor, so he was running for re-election, he was on the council that denied all these parking lot applications. He says he has labored to improve parking and congestion through parking lots and structures, and quote, "Working with other governmental agencies, I have worked on plans for off-site parking centers." All right, now the time you've been waiting for, I'm gonna read some of my favorite quotes from the many letters the city received against these parking lots. And it should be noted that in cases like this, it's not the job of the city to consider all of these public comments except when the public brings relevant facts. Because remember, cities need actual evidence to deny administrative land use applications. But that said, it's really fun, so let's get into it. First, I'm convinced that everyone in the town listens to the song Big Yellow Taxicab on the regular.
Today, paradise, put up a parking lot.
You'll see what I mean. I feel small parking areas are beginning to be scattered all over town. I don't agree with this idea. As Joni Mitchell said, they paved paradise and put up a parking lot. Now, ironically, the person who wrote this letter says, "I own 2 vacation rentals opposed to the place for the parking lot." The fact that this person is running Airbnbs makes me a little bit less sympathetic to their claim that they're ruining the residential atmosphere of the neighborhood. I would hate to be a homeowner that purchased real estate in a residential area to come to find out there would be a public parking lot located right next to me. This will certainly have a negative effect on home values. I should note that the average home value in this town is currently around $2.5 million. We feel that opening the door to granting conditional use permits allowing a commercial use of zoned property is a very slippery slope. Opening up the doors to commercial uses on residential property is going to create some real animosity between neighbors. Is that a threat? We know that our rural quality is swiftly vanishing, but let's not totally pave paradise. We would like to point out that any landowner in the canyon with a flat piece of ground and easy highway access could also petition the city for a variance so that they too could exploit the tourists visiting the park by turning their field into a parking lot. We are one such landowner, yet we do not seek such approval or bemoan the possibility that we might have been able to supplement our income by paving paradise and putting up a parking lot. We wish to inform you, the town, of our opposition to Alan Stalker's proposed parking lot. This project would subject an entire stretch of Springdale to potential commercial development. I love how people think that once one parking lot is built, then automatically you have Walmarts built all around it. In sum, we believe 1, that it would be a travesty to mix land uses in this way, and 2, that such a decision would raise a very real takings issue that would be actionable in the courts. That is a threat. Okay, this one's a little surprising, honestly. So this person first goes through pages of the local ordinance, doing their own analysis of why that the city council should deny this application, and then says, People parking after a car ride have a potential to relieve themselves upon arrival. This proposed parking lot does not provide public restrooms, and public restrooms will not be close by. This could cause a situation where people will be using the bushes and creating an unsafe sanitary problem and odors, which will affect the peace of surrounding residents. I mean, I don't even know what to say. Now, just to be clear, I'm not trying to make fun of these people who wrote these letters. I'm sure they're great people, and they provided us with a lot of entertainment, which is really what this video is all about. So go ahead and write into your local city council and send me the best letters you can find of crazy situations happening in your town. So those are the facts. Allegedly, of course. My personal belief about why the town won in this case comes down to the common sense nature of parking lots. We've all been in a parking lot, and we all understand that the average parking lot is not the nicest place to be. And so we get really worried about placing one of those parking lots next to a house. But that doesn't mean that all parking lots have to be terrible and that there's absolutely no way to make a parking lot work. And so the question remains, did the town have substantial evidence to justify its denial of this parking lot? Or was it just capitulating to the neighbors? To answer that question, I'll let you be the jury, so please answer me in the comments, and thanks for watching.